Florida State absolutely showed out on Sunday night, and obviously the national media, folks in the industry, they're taking notice, but they're not the only ones taking notice. Recruits were there, recruits were tuned in, and recruits were watching. And we told you that this LSU game might be more important than the Clemson game just from a momentum standpoint, from a recruiting standpoint. Florida State has been crushing it, and they've got a top 5 class, but beating LSU and beating LSU soundly like they did was going to take that momentum and then just skyrocket it to another level. And it's done just that. We're going to talk about some really important recruits that Florida State made a move on. And listen, I'm just going to tell you, we're going to talk about Jeremiah Smith at the end of the video and what I'm hearing on that and what we think ultimately ends up happening. So stick around because you don't want to miss that. But let's jump right into it. Obviously, the Noles beat the heck out of the Tigers, and there were recruits that were there. There were also recruits tuned in and watching. But the first guy I want to talk about is somebody that we've talked about on this channel a ton, Jamari Howard. He's a top 100 DB in the country. He is a 4-star in this 2024 class, 6'2", 175, plays down in South Florida, an absolute beast. He's a kid that Florida State desperately wants in this class. I wouldn't say they need, but they desperately want him in this class. And we've been telling you all along, we think that he ends up at Florida State. We think that he ends up as part of the Seminoles class, and others are starting to come around to that as well. I noticed that Steve Wiltfong at 247 dropped a prediction on him. I've thought that Florida State was the leader here for a while. I've thought that they were beating Florida's head in for this recruitment, and my thoughts on that haven't changed. I would not be shocked at all. We've talked about how this may go into December. I wouldn't be shocked if this happened faster. I wouldn't be shocked if you heard about this before December, as though we've told you that timeline's probably going to be all season. Don't be surprised if Jamari Howard makes a move. Now, that's not me guaranteeing it. That's not me telling you that it's coming in the next week, but don't be shocked. I think that what Florida State's doing, the momentum that they have on the trail right now, they don't even have to pressure kids. They don't have to pressure kids like UF was doing in the offseason. They know the product that they're going to have. They know the results on the field, and kids are just dying to get into this class before it fills up. Now, the class would never fill up to a point where they would not take Jamari Howard. They would always make room for an elite kid like that. But the defensive back class of Jamari Howard, KJ Bolden, Charles Lester, Ricky Knight, CJ, and maybe more is otherworldly. It is ridiculous, and it's going to happen. Just keep your eyes peeled and watch out for Jamari Howard. Could happen anytime. Might be in December, but it could happen anytime. LJ McCray is a defensive lineman, out of Daytona Beach, Florida. He's a star that I've thought UF was in a really good spot for a long time. I've really thought that Florida State just wasn't close enough here. I didn't think they were in a great spot for him, a top 100 defensive lineman, because he just wasn't coming around as much as he was making his way to campus in Gainesville. But he was in attendance on Sunday night, and I think that's huge for the Noles. He's not going to commit until after his official visit, which happens in a few weeks. They're in Tallahassee. It's his last official visit that he'll take. And I thought the Noles were probably so far behind at that point that the official visit just wouldn't be able to do enough to get them back into it. I no longer think that anymore. I think that getting him to Orlando, having him experience that 75-25 or 80-10 crowd that was all FSU fans, seeing the Noles put a beat down on an SEC team, a top 5 opponent, I think that moved the Noles up in a huge way. I'm not willing to say that FSU leads here. I'm not willing to say that he's a lock for this class, but I think that they've got a great chance to add to this. There's been a lot of complaints. There's been a lot of whining about defensive line recruiting. It could all be kind of quenched here in the next few weeks. There are other commits that I think we have a good shot on the defensive line. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on those guys. We've talked about them in other videos. But you pull LJ McCray and you pull him away from seemingly it was going to be a Florida lock. You're able to do that. There are no complaints about defensive line recruiting. And he's not the only blue chip that Florida State could potentially add to this class. Next up, let's look at the 2025 class. Armando Blunt. He is a 5-star defensive lineman from down there in Miami, Florida, 6'3", 250. Elite prospect. Doesn't even begin to describe it. We have talked about him a little bit. Won't go into great detail. Just watch his huddle film. Go check out the thoughts that the guys on 247 and others have when they're doing the scouting breakdown. But he's another one that I think the Noles have made a massive impact on. 2025 kids, I know it's harder to get hyped up about that, but as elite as Florida State's class is in 2024 right now, I'm telling you 2025 might be more ridiculous. And that's crazy because we have like 3 or 4 5-stars that are going to be in this class, maybe more. We'll talk about another one here in just a minute. But 2025 could be even more ridiculous. I think the Noles are in a great spot for Blunt. I think they go down into South Florida and pick up his commitment. Now, there's a long way to go. And sometimes you don't want to be the first commitment for a South Florida 5-star. You kind of like to have them commit somewhere else in the year before and then, flip to you later. Obviously, Florida State's done a good job of getting 5-stars to flip and maybe not stay committed to where you thought they were going to be. But I really like where they're at for Blunt. I think there's a chance that he could announce sometime during this year. I think they're riding a lot of momentum. I think they'll get him back on campus later in the year, obviously all on officials because he is a junior. But this kid is super elite. And again, the defensive line recruiting complaints, I've heard them. I understand them. Florida State might do a lot to quench a lot of those fears and calm a lot of those nerves over the next few weeks and months, and certainly going into the 2025 class as well. Listen, let's keep going on this. I got a couple more guys we want to talk about, but if you were at our tailgate just on Sunday, we had about 700 people there, biggest and best we've ever done. We're doing it again big up in Clemson. Link is going to be in the description. We had about 700 people there. My tickets for Clemson, it's a much smaller place. I don't know if you guys have been to Clemson, but when we go up there and kick that tail, y'all need to come tailgate with us. Space is limited. I've got about 100 tickets that we can sell for this, and that's all. So don't wait. A lot of you guys waited till the week of for LSU. We had walk-ups. We were able to get you in. No big deal. We ain't going to be able to do that in Clemson. They are very strict. It is very secured. It is very monitored. If you don't get your tickets, you're going to have to be tailgating with somebody else before we go kick Clemson's tail in a couple of weeks. Let's keep it rolling. Zay Mincy is one that I just want to mention very, very quickly before we move on. He's a DB that I think Florida State has always been in it for, but this man so much felt like a Florida-Miami charge in late battle. Alabama was involved, interested here. I think the Noles have done a great job here. Obviously, he was in town for the LSU game. He told Noles 247 Zach Blostein that he could be making a silent commitment here in the next couple of weeks. I'm always a little bit leery of that. If you're not willing to go on record or go public, how committed are you? Not calling him out. It's just my thought on silent commits in general. You can obviously switch a silent commitment at any time much easier than a public commitment where you kind of get some of that backlash. You kind of get some of that people calling you out. I think the Noles have done a good job here. Obviously, the Patterson recruitment didn't go your way. I don't think Florida State's going to quit there. I don't think they're going to give up on an elite kid like Zaquan Patterson. But if they're able to pivot and get a top recruit in Zay Mincy, hats off to Mike Norvell and the staff. And when I say pivot, I don't think they were ever truly out of it for Mincy, but I think they've turned up the heat. I think getting LJ McCray, I don't think those guys are a package deal, but maybe getting both those guys together, they're teammates now, there's some familiarity. I think that would be super big. Mincy would be, again, we talked about DBs. We talked about what this class already is from that perspective. They add Mincy, and it's probably one of the best DB classes we've seen in the last 10 years. Not close. Zay Mincy would be a huge one for the Noles to pick up. All right, here's what you've been waiting for. You guys have wanted to know about this. We've been getting calls. We've been getting texts. We've been getting DMs, Discord messages, everything else. Jeremiah Smith. Honestly, the best player in this 2024 class. I know they got a quarterback rated above him by one. It's not close. Jeremiah Smith is the most physically talented and gifted freak athlete in this class. Currently committed to Ohio State, a 5-star wide receiver out of South Florida. He was in attendance when Florida State's Keon Coleman put on an absolute show in front of the nation, in front of over 10 million viewers, and obviously a very pro-Florida State crowd. Jeremiah Smith is a recruit that I have been thinking the Noles have been running second for a while. I think they've done a phenomenal job with him. I think that Ohio State, obviously, where he's committed to, I get it. I think the Noles have been trending here. I think they've been surging. I think the fact that they got him on campus multiple times through the summer without having to use their official visit, they still have him, and obviously they're in great communication with him to get him to come to games like the game in Orlando, like the Miami game that'll be coming up in November. I think it's impressive that they've got their official visit with him probably coming in December. And at this point, a lot could happen. It's tough to project a flip. It's tough to say, oh, we're going to flip him away from Brian Hartline. Oh, we're going to flip him away from Ohio State. But at this point, I think he's a Nole. This can get old takes exposed later. This can get shared everywhere. The Ohio State fans can have a field day with it if I'm wrong. I think when you look at what Florida State's offense is, when you look at where Ohio State is from an offensive production, when you look at the relationships, when you look at being in-state, when you look at what Florida State can offer from an NIL perspective, if you're not a member of the Battle's End, go sign up and do that right now. When you look at what Florida State has going for it, the production, the relationships, the NIL, they are the total package. I don't know that there are too many better places to go in this country. I think Georgia might be one of them. I think that Alabama obviously has a track record, and then I think it stops there. I don't think anyone else in this country can offer what Florida State is offering right now. And if you watched on Sunday night, you believe that too. College football is worried. Ohio State is worried about this. And if I'm wrong later, I'm wrong. But I think Jeremiah Smith ends up in this class. There's a long way to go. I think there's a lot that has to happen. That's not inside info. Nobody's told me he's a lock. None of that. When I project it out and I look at how this class goes, when I look at how this season goes, when I look at how Ohio State's season's going to go, I like the Noles to end up flipping the commitment and pulling him. Bookmark it, save it. If I'm wrong, I'll eat the crow. Totally good with that. What are your thoughts? Let's talk about it down in the comments. I would ask who you want, but I want all of them. I want the Noles to pick up all 5 guys that we just talked about. Obviously, if I can only pick one, I'm taking the number 2 overall player in the class. I'm taking probably the best athlete in this year's class. If Florida State gets 3 of these guys, if Florida State gets 2 of these guys, their class will be one of the most elite in the country. If they're able to close on 3, if they're able to close on all 4 2024 guys, they've got a shot at the number 2-3 class in the country. I don't know that anybody's catching Georgia. But I'm telling you, the Mike Norvell can't recruit narrative is going to die. The Florida State is broke and doesn't have NIL funds. That narrative is going to die. The narrative around Florida State's relevance in this sport, in this country, in the Southeast is going to die. It's already dying on the field. Florida State's not going to be able to match up with those SEC trenches. Boom, false. But it's about to die on the trail as well, if it hasn't already. Florida State recruiting like an absolutely elite program, which they are, and they are reminding the college football world of how things are supposed to run. Things in the state of Florida run through Florida State. And if Florida State can close, if they can continue what they're doing, it's going to be a special year, both on the field and on the trail. Make sure that you're subscribed. We're going to keep you updated on all of this stuff. We appreciate you guys for tuning in. I went off on some people that had some incorrect opinions, we'll say, about how the Florida State LSU game was going to go down. I didn't give them too hard of a time, but we are going to call them out. If you missed that video, or if you watched it and want another laugh, click right here to check it out.